doing my second live video on discouragement. This is part 2. You know, ridicule. It is often an effective method of creating discouragement. And sometimes ridicule, it comes from those you love even, not just from your enemies. Or worse yet, ridicule comes from yourself. And if you ridicule yourself, don't be surprised if you get discouraged. In Nehemiah chapter 4, this is where Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And Sanballat and his cohorts, they feel threatened and jealous by the Jews. And his reaction to Nehemiah's plan is to ridicule them. He says, "Will they restore their wall? Do these feeble believers think that they can accomplish such a huge, overwhelming project? Will they offer sacrifice? Are these fanatics going to pray the wall up? Will they finish in a day? Do they really know how big a project this job really is? Sometimes in my business, I go, this project is too big for me. Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble that were burned as they are?" And then Tobiah, his friend, jumps in and he exaggerates. He gets on that exaggeration wagon. And boy, I tell you, when you get on that exaggeration wagon, then your discouragement is really going to go high. He says, "What are they building? If even a fox climbed up on it, that fox would break down the rickety walls of stones." Translation is, you guys couldn't build a strong wall, even if you succeeded in putting all those stones on top of one another. All the work will have been for nothing. So, their hope, of course, was to simply, these guys, was to get them discouraged, that they would do nothing. And I'm telling you what, there's something that discouraged people often do, and that is nothing. So, in the onslaught of all this discouragement, it makes an impact on the people. And so, what does Nehemiah do in chapter 4, verse 4 and 5? First, he prays. Instead of trying to argue with his enemies, because I'm telling you what, you can't argue with those that are ridiculing you. It is rather useless to argue against discouragers. It's better to run to God for encouragement. And the second thing he does in that prayer is he's honest. Well, be honest how you're feeling. You're feeling discouraged, despised. And third, he prays for God to do his enemies in. Now, before you get too upset about this, Nehemiah, I think he's just simply venting towards God rather than outwardly towards his enemy. So it's keeping himself under control. And that's the whole point of prayer. Keep yourself under control. And it also reflects an important attitude of Nehemiah that helps to deflect his discouragement, because he remembers that he can't do anything about his enemies and that God is ultimately in control. So, with his anger properly directed and his perspective now properly focused after prayer, he can deal with this discouragement. And notice the simple statement he makes in verse 6. "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height." Now this is important, remember this, in fighting discouragement. Instead of building the whole thing all the way up, while others hadn't got their even started, he works all the parts together into a full, complete circle, but it's only halfway up. This would bring a sense of completion and help to the people to realize that it can be done. He took a very practical and balanced approach to try to build their confidence against in discouragement. And I think this is so important in fighting discouragement. Reach for some realistic goals. Be balanced, balanced in the work if you're fighting discouragement. It's better to reach a lower goal and keep going by accomplishing part of the task than to get so overwhelmed that you quit before you do anything. In essence, Nehemiah, he just ignored the discouragers. But he also carefully planned some realistic goals to help the people see real accomplishments. And when you see little accomplishments, you are encouraged. So encouragement requires some serious practical steps to ward off discouragement. Now, in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 7 and 8, when the enemy realized that they had failed to discourage these people through their ridicule, they tried another tactic: fear. More negative people are added to the already negative crowd that is ridiculing, and their plot is a terrorist strategy, a surprise attack. And if Satan's work of ridicule and mocking doesn't stop you, he will use another tactic: fear. And fear is usually quite effective against most people. They fear that they're not capable. We fear that we can't make time. We fear that we'll fail the task. We fear the quality of the job we might do. We fear the opinions of others. We fear the work that we'll be involved in will be greater than we're ready to handle right now. We fear failure. We fear our weaknesses. And sometimes, you know what I've found out? We fear success. Because there's a lot of responsibility that will be added to your life when you do have success. So once a good dose of fear sets in, you don't have to worry about results, because it won't happen. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 9, Nehemiah's response to this new threat of fear is twofold. First, to go to God. Again, he starts with praying to God. And second, he takes practical steps to deal with the real fear. The genuine threat here was that there was going to be a surprise attack that would occur to demoralize the people from further work. So you know what he does? He sets out guards. Guards were posted at the most likely places of the attacks. And I can't emphasize enough how important both steps are. Go to God when you get discouraged, and then do what you can do. Some Christians, they're good at going to God, but they don't take any practical steps to negate the fear. God will do what we can't do, but will expect us to do what we can do. So this showed the people a healthy balance in dealing with their fears. Go to God first. Use your head and do what you can do to minimize the fears. Some people don't do the first one, go to God, and never the second one. They only do the first one and never the second one. And if you do that, I tell you, the fear will remain. And some people only do the second one. They do what they can do, and they don't go to God, and they never have peace. The peace that he will handle the parts that they can't deal with. So it takes balance. You must have both to overcome the fear. Hi, Leanne. Hi, Diane. Hi, Lois. Hi, Mako. I'm so glad that you're here with me. I don't know how much time I have left, so if I get cut off, sorry. In chapter 4, verse 10, the enemy was making an impact. And another thing that causes discouragement is getting tired. I think they were getting tired. Perhaps by this point, they were worn out by the project alone, building that wall. And now they had to play army as well. They were feeling like this project, it was turning into more work than they originally thought it would be. They hadn't planned on playing the role of guard as well as building. So tiredness, it drains the resolve to work, which only gives slowdown to our work, and so gives proof to the belief that this is just too much for me, and so you get discouraged. Thus it becomes a vicious cycle, feeding itself. Tiredness can allow fear to take hold. And the result is, in verses 11 and 12, they were trembling. It's also interesting how fear resulted in their own practice now of exaggeration. They start exaggerating. Their response was to these surprise attacks plans. In verse 12, they said this to each other 10 times. Wherever you turn, they will attack us. Oh no! And they repeat the worst case scenario enough times that they eventually believe that it will happen. Aren't we funny? We would rather tell ourselves the worst will happen than to contemplate the possibility that with God's help, the best will happen. Well, maybe I should make a part 3, because I don't know if I'm still on. I'm going to shut it off and do a part 3 where Nehemiah's quick steps when they start exaggerating and believing that those attacks are going to happen. Tune back in, Mako and Sharon, Diane, Lois, and Leanne, for the rest of the story.